This is session 4, the final session on the Lenten study From a Gate to a Grave. And we start into this last evening, the last 2 days, Thursday evening through Friday morning. One of the things that we need to understand about this is what happens inside the city of Jerusalem during this Passover event. There's usually about 100,000 people who live there in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. During the Passover week, there will be an additional 100,000 visitors. And on top of that, Pilate brings in an extra set of guards and Roman soldiers to make sure that the peace is kept. And in this account, we got here that Herod has come from the north, up in the Galilean territory, to be here this Passover, and he has brought his soldiers with him. So you gather in this city. In fact, they always say that no matter how many people gather in the city of Jerusalem, there's always room for one more. And so you have this massive, massive crowd, and it's not just Jewish people. This is such a large, large gathering of people, it turns in what we would call a county fair. Merchants from everywhere gather here to sell their goods. We have people that gather that are non-Jews to sell spices and animals and jewelry and clothing, different types of food. So it has that kind of carnival, county fair feel. When you move into the Passover itself, this is not a corporate celebration. They don't all go to the temple and celebrate Passover. Passover is a family affair. It happens inside the home of people, where you gather with your family. And if you don't have a family, you go to be with another family, or another family invites you in so that everybody is taken care of. Even the poorest of the poor are welcome in. During this Passover meal, wine is a very significant part of what happens. And there is an old Jewish saying that even the poorest of the poor would sell his shirt to buy wine for the Passover. And so, as we begin to move into this, there's some things here on this map that we need to kind of look at, and then I'll be sending this to you so you can have it handy if you'd like. This is the old city of Jerusalem. We're going to start here at the Last Supper, but then as we move through the session today, we're going to be moving into all of these different rooms and areas surrounding the city. I sent to you what is often called a short version of the Passover Seder, or Seder. It depends on which you're saying. That means the service itself. Piscah, or Pescha, is what is the word for Passover. And then there is another word that the Jewish community is familiar with, Haggadah, which is the retelling. And that is what we have here. The retelling, this is how they go through a proper way of retelling their history on that Passover meal. As we move through this, there's some things that we should look at. How they gather. They have the meal prepared. There's a whole series of foods, and I'm not going to go into all of that. You'll have a copy. You can go little bit by little bit. But you notice on that it starts off with the singing of a song, and then there is a lighting of a candle. And this is done by the female head of the household. And then they begin their liturgy, as we would say it. The leader pours a cup of wine and holds the cup up in his right hand. Blessed are you, O Lord God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this season. You have chosen us. You have given this holy festival in loving kindness and blessed your servants. And so with that, the first cup is taken, and he says, our story tells us that in diverse ways, God promises freedom to those who have gone before us. With the cups of wine, we recall each one of that process. For the Lord said, I will free you from the burden of the Egyptians. After this, in a response from the people, they all take up a cup of wine and drink it. And then immediately they will pour a second cup. And let me explain. When we talk about the 4 cups of the Seder, these are not little sips. A cup of wine is equivalent to 3 fingers in a cup. So it's a good swallow, and you gulp it down basically. After you pour the second cup, the leader begins here. With the second cup, we recall the second promise of liberation. For it is written, I will deliver you from your bondage. And they drink the second cup of wine. After that second cup comes probably the most important, and that dates and goes way back. And that is the questions that are to be asked that remind the people who they are. Usually the youngest person in the room asks these questions. A child. Why is this night any different from any other night? On all other nights we eat unleavened bread, and on this night only matzah. And if you know what matzah is, it's a cracker, unleavened cracker. On all other nights we eat all kinds of herbs. On this night we especially eat bitter herbs. All other nights we do not dip the herbs. On this night we do. Why? All other nights we eat in an ordinary manner, but tonight we dine with this special ceremony. And so with this then, the ending of the questions and the responding of the elder, you pour the third cup of wine. As it is written, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. And notice that word, I will redeem you. And you drink a third cup of wine. Then comes the actual meal of the event, where they begin to move around. And as they're serving dinner, someone will go to the front door of the house and open it a little bit. That is done for a very specific purpose. There is an extra setting on the table, and that place setting is for Elijah. It is said that he is to come back on Passover and usher in the reign of the Messiah. And so they're hoping he will show up at their dinner that evening. Once they finish the meal, there is a fourth cup. And the leader lifts it up. As it is written, I will take you to be my people. And they drink the fourth cup. And then there is a song at the very end. Shalom, cherubim, shalom, cherubim, shalom, shalom. Which means, farewell, good friends, until we meet again. And when they finish that song, someone goes to the front door and closes the door because Elijah did not come. But the event is over when they said, well, maybe next year in Jerusalem. So now we move to pick up a little reminder of what happened last week about Judas Iscariot. We talked about one group paid him 30 pieces of silver. Another group promised him 30 pieces of silver. In Luke, it tells us Satan entered into Judas, and then he went out and carried his deed. So it's in this upper room event. On the first day of the unleavened bread, according to Mark, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for the Passover?" So he sent two of the disciples, saying, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a water jar will meet you, and follow him." That is significant to the Jewish community because men don't haul water. Women haul water. So this is a clue. When you see this man carrying water, follow him. He's going to take you to a special place. And wherever he enters, just say to the owner of the house, "The teacher asked, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?" And he will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. I think if you make a trip to Jerusalem, what they're going to show you in what they consider to be the upper room is a two-story building with an outside staircase. So you go up an outside staircase onto the second floor. "Go make preparations for us there." And they went and found it just as he said. When it was evening, he came with the 12, and they all had taken their places and were eating. We think of that beautiful picture of the disciples sitting in chairs around the big table, and Jesus is in the middle, and how nice and neat that looks. But that's not the way these people ate. It's more like the larger picture. The table was a very short table. You actually reclined. And you reclined in a certain way so your feet were behind you, so not to be in somebody else's face. And you didn't have knives and forks. You had the food in the middle, like what we would call camp style, and you would break off the bread. And the bread would be your spoon and your knife and your fork. And so they're reclining there, and Jesus starts the evening with a statement. "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, the one who is eating with me." And they began to be distressed. And they said to him, one after the other, "Surely not I, surely not I, surely not I." And he said, "It is the one of the 12 who is dipping bread in the bowl with me." Now, we like to think at that very minute when Jesus said that, Judas is scooping up a bunch of beans or something in his bread. But it could be that they were all dipping at that time. But that was a sign. It's one of you who is sitting here at the table breaking bread with me. "For the Son of Man goes as it is written, but woe to the one who betrays the Son of Man. It would have been better for that one if he had not been born." Not been born? That's pretty harsh. Is Jesus saying that there was one born specifically to do this? While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body." He does this after the breaking of the loaf, which is just after the second cup of wine. Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all of them drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my covenant, which is poured out for you and for many. Truly I tell you, I will never drink of it again until that day I drink it with you in the kingdom of God." That is cup number 3. And remember, the just refresh you. Cup 1, I will remember you. Cup 2, I will rescue you. Cup 3, I will redeem you. And cup 4, I will bring you to myself and make you mine. When they had sung a hymn, they went to the Mount of Olives to pray. And there is an entire section called Hallel, Psalms 113 to 118, which are Passover Psalms that you sing and you say there. So as Jesus and the disciples were going out, Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go to Galilee." And Peter said to him, "Even though all become deserters, I will not." And Jesus said, "Well, you will. This very night you will. Before the cock crows twice, you will have denied me 3 times. But he said vehemently, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And they all said the same. And then you move over to Luke, and suddenly he picks up the story. "Simon, Simon, listen. Satan has demanded to shift you out like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail." I want to point out something here when you look at this text. Now I'm reading from the New Revised Standard. I did not look this up in the Common English Version, which we usually use at our church. But when he makes this statement, "Simon, Simon, listen. Satan has demanded to sift you. And the word Satan is in capital letters. When the New Testament was written, all the letters were capital. So does this mean Satan as a noun, Satan as a person? Or could it be a little s, where Satan, the word Satan, simply means the adversary? The adversary has demanded. You'll hear that same tone in the book of Job as Satan, the adversary, puts pressure on Job. And once again, he said, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and even death." So they leave the upper room and they go out into the garden, just outside the wall. It's often called the Garden of Gethsemane. It is an oil press located on the lower slopes right there near Jerusalem. And he said to his disciples, let's see, "Sit here while I pray." And he took Peter, James, and John further. That's that inner circle that we find is the closest to Jesus throughout his entire ministry. And he began to be distressed and agitated. He said to them, "I'm deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." And going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed. If it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba." Now, I have heard for years and years that this term Abba is not like saying father, but it's like saying daddy. And it's a softer word. It's a more intimate word. But the Jewish scholars say that that's not the way it is. That Abba has that strong father sense. "Father, for all things with you are possible." remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. Now let me remind you, when Jesus was at the Passover and he lifted up that cup, this is my blood poured out for you. That was the third cup, the cup of redemption. What Jesus is saying in the garden here is that, do I have to drink this cup of redemption to be the redeemer of these people, or is there another way? So he comes back and he finds them asleep. And we wonder about that event. A wonderful biblical scholar and a historian, Charles Page, who spent probably most of his life living in the culture of the people around Jerusalem, told a story about his mother. He had come home from Israel to be with his mother in Tennessee. His mother was not doing well at all. Since he was back, he told his brothers and sisters that he would take the night shift so they could sleep and go to work the next day. He said he was sitting there browsing through a magazine, and his mother suddenly just sat straight up in the bed and said, "Charles, why did the disciples fall asleep in the garden?" And he said, without even looking up from his magazine, he said, "Well, Mother, they were drunk." "No, they weren't," she said. "They were all Baptist, and they can't have been drunk." But yet he has something to say there. These men had just gone through the Passover event. We know that the ceremonial part includes 4 cups of wine. And then there is probably other cups of wine involved in the eating of the actual meal itself. You take all of that, you take them in the darkness, you take them in the cool of the evening, and in the quietness, and you really expect them to stay awake. He said, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch just 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into a time of trial. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." That's usually our biggest excuse for doing something we know we're not supposed to. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. He comes to them a second time, and they are asleep. And then he went away for a third time. As they say, three's a charm. He comes back. "Are you still sleeping? Well, just go ahead and take your rest. It's enough. The hour has come. See, my betrayer is at hand." Immediately, while they were speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priest, the scribes, and the elder. Now, we, for some reason, always picture these Roman guards coming out behind Judas to take Jesus. But these are not Roman guards. These are Jewish people. These are the temple guards and the temple police who have come out to carry Jesus away. Now, the betrayer has given them the sign. The one I had given them the sign, the one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. So when they came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. And they laid their hands on him and arrested him. And then there's a neat little story that's found in all 3 of the Gospels. Suddenly, and this is Matthew, suddenly one of those with Jesus took his hand on the sword and struck one of the slaves of the high priest and cut off his ear. Mark, but one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. But in Luke, then one of them struck the slave of the high priest, cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched his ear, and he healed him. So Jesus instructs them to put the swords away. Do you not think that I could appeal to my Father, and he would have at once sent more than 12 legions of angels to stop this? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled? And this is where Matthew often comes in with these Old Testament quotes. Jesus said to the crowds, have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Because all of this was done to fulfill the scriptures. You arrest me as if I was a bandit. I sat among you day after day, teaching. You didn't arrest me then. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled. And immediately, according to Matthew, then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Just like this, and just like Jesus predicted, they are gone. There is a unique little story in the Gospel of Mark. All of them deserted and fled. And then a certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. And they caught a hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. Many scholars now believe that this one who was looking at this event as a young boy and then ran away was the very same person that we know as Mark. Probably the one who wrote this gospel. He's also the one who eventually go around with Paul and Barnabas on his missionary tour. So it's a telltale thing. Mark puts himself in the story. Then suddenly we find ourselves in a set of trials and situations. Jesus comes before the Sanhedrin. Caiaphas, the high priest, and the scribes had gathered there. And suddenly, while all of this is going on, we see that there's someone in the distance following. And Peter was following the crowd from a distance. He went into the courtyard of Caiaphas' house and sat down to see what would happen. Peter is the only disciple who returned to be with Jesus. So they took Jesus, this is in Mark, to the high priest. And now the high priest and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death. But they found none, for many had given false testimony against him. And the testimonies that they gave did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony, saying, we heard him say that he will destroy this temple with hands and then build it back in 3 days. A one that is not made with hands. But then they couldn't even agree on that. Then the high priest stood up. Have you no answer? He asked Jesus. What is it that they are testifying against you? But Jesus was silent. And then the high priest again said, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." When the high priest heard this, he tore his clothes and said, "We don't need any more witnesses, for you have heard this. It is blasphemy." And if you remember, the Romans gave the Jewish people permission to carry out their own laws, and the law regarding blasphemy is being stoned to death. All of them condemned him, deserving death. And some began to spit on him, to blindfold him and strike him, saying, "Prophesy." And the guards also took him and beat him. And remember, at this time, these are all Jewish people that are doing this to Jesus. And while all this is going on, we turn the camera to what's going on in the courtyard. Peter's denial. In one, Peter's sitting outside and the servant girl comes. And he denies it. "Oh, you were with Jesus the Galilean." Another servant girl saw him and said, "You're the one that was with the man from Nazareth." And he denied it. And then a little while later, the bystanders says, "Certainly you're one of them, because your accent gives you away." And he began to curse and swore an oath, "I do not know the man." And at that moment, the cock crowed. The other version, the servant girl came and saw Peter. "I saw you with him." "No." And then the servant girl saw him again and made us another comment. And then after a little while, a bystander said, "Yes, you're one that's with him, because we can tell that you're a Galilean." So he goes through this period of recognizing and listening to himself, physically, out loud, denying that he even knows Jesus. In Matthew 27, we get an extended version of this. When morning came, the chief priests and elders conferred together against Jesus in order to put him to death. Judas, the one that was his betrayer, repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priest. "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood," he said. But they said, "What is that to us? It's yours." Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed and went out and hanged himself. But the chief priest took the silver and said, "It's not lawful for us to use this, because it is blood money." So they bought a piece of property, a potter's field, so that foreigners could be buried there. I think it's very interesting too. That's something I ran into not long ago, in saying, well, he hung himself. Where is the tree big enough to hang himself? And there is a tree that is called the Judas tree. It's a tree that's found all over the world, and it's found right here in North Alabama. This time of year, we call that tree redbud trees. But in many, it is termed the Judas tree. All of this was said to fulfill what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. And they took 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one whom the price had been set to redeem the people of Israel. Now, all of this is going on during the night. They arrest Jesus as he's doing his evening prayers. They come back and they take him to Caiaphas' house, and they go through all the mockery of the trial going on there, and it is night. In Jewish tradition and law, all of this is illegal. You never tried anyone over in the darkness, in the cloak of night, and especially during the time of the festival. And besides that, if you are condemning someone to death, the rule was you passed the penalty and talked about it. You had to sleep on it for a night and then come back and cast your vote of a sentence. So all of this is out of the ordinary for these people. So they decide to bring him now before Pilate. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held consultation with the elders and the scribes and the whole council. They bound him and handed him over to Pilate. It's festival time. Passover was last night. It is still Passover day on Friday morning. But they changed the sentence. They bring him to Pilate saying it's not blasphemy, it's treason, because Jesus claims to be a king. Pilate asked him, "Are you king of the Jews?" He answered him and said, "You say so." Then the chief priest accused him of many things. And Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Pilate discovered quickly that they were trying to put the burden of having Jesus put to death not on them, but on the Romans. And then, because if they had put Jesus to death, there would have probably been a major riot in Jerusalem for all those people who followed Jesus. They would have stormed the house of Caiaphas and maybe even the temple, demanding justice. So Pilate takes the chief priest and the crowds. And remember, and let me throw another statement here. We are often painted in many sermons and stories where the statement says, "And the same people who cheered him on, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord as he enters Jerusalem, is the same people who said, 'Crucify him' on Friday." That's not true. It was the common people that brought him in under the Hail King of David. But here, the crowd is the Sanhedrin and the Jewish leadership. Pilate says to them, "I find no basis for an accusation against this man." But they were insistent. The man stirs up trouble by the teaching that he gives. And so they said, "He has done this throughout Judea and from Galilee where he began." Well, when Pilate heard this, he said, "Is this man Galilean? Well, then he's actually under Herod's jurisdiction, who just happens to be in town. Take him to Herod." And I think it's very almost comical. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had been wanting to see him for a long time, because he had heard about the things that he had been doing and was hoping to see him perform a sign. He questioned him at some length, but Jesus never gave an answer. Even Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt and mocked him. They put an elegant robe on him and then sent him back to Pilate. And then there was a footnote in the scripture. That same day, Herod and Pilate became friends, because before that date they were enemies. So Pilate calls all the chief priests together to try to convince them one more time. You brought a man to me who you said was perverting the people. I've examined him in your presence and have not found this man guilty of anything that you have charged him with. Neither has Herod, because he sent him back to me. I'll therefore flog him and release him. But that was not good enough. As it rallied on, we hear in another gospel the story about he's trying to bargain with them. Look, the festival's here. I usually release a criminal of some sort back into the people. There's a man by the name of Barabbas who was imprisoned for insurrection. He had committed murder. And so he asked him, who would you want me to give to you? Barabbas or Jesus? And they cried out, Barabbas. And Pilate said, then what do you wish for me to do with the man that you call King of the Jews? And they shouted back, crucify him. Pilate said, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted more vehemently, crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. It's an unusual move. Rarely done. Usually you were either flogged or you were crucified, not both. So, the reason Pilate is doing this is what we talked about in the very beginning. Pilate knew if he did not do something to stop this possible insurrection, there could be a major riot. And so he decides to go ahead and condemn Jesus. It is very interesting, earlier on in the text, when Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, Caiaphas and the leaders are gathered together, and Caiaphas himself made a statement saying, do you not understand? It will be better for one man to die than for a whole nation to perish. If a riot had started, Rome would have crushed Jerusalem right then. And so, for all practical purposes, Caiaphas became a prophet. The soldiers led him into a courtyard in the governor's palace, where the Roman soldiers were. Now is a shift. He's being shifted from the temple guards, the Jewish people, into the hands of the Romans and the Roman guards. The soldiers led him into a place of courtyard that they called together the whole cohort. That's up to 500 soldiers. They clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting thorns, they made a crown and put it on him. They began to salute him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him on the head with a reed and spat upon him, and knelt down and paid homage to him. And after mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak, put on his own clothes, and they led him out. So where's the flogging? In this reading, the flogging didn't occur. It was ordered, but it never took place. So as they were leaving, They compelled a passerby who was coming in from another country to carry the cross of Jesus. Simon the Cyrene, father of Alexander and Rufus. Our traditional image of the cross is historically wrong. And I've seen, especially this time of year, all these people who are showing their religiosity by taking up a cross and walking across a county or across a state or trying to walk across the country. And I think it's almost hypocritical because they have this cross and it has these nice big wheels on the back of it, so they just roll this thing all over the place. But when you had crucifixions, the upright beam, those beams were already in the ground. What Jesus would have carried would be the cross beam that his arms would have been attached to, because they would have attached his arms to that beam and then set it up on top of the cross beam. So it's this cross beam, this heavy cross beam, that Simon is carrying. And a great number of women followed them, beating their breast and wailing for him. And Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourself and your children." And they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh, which was a painkiller, but he rejected it. It says it's about then when you have to take all three. We hear these things about the 7 Christs from the cross. You have to take all 3 Gospels to get them all, really all 4. When they came to that place, he was there with being crucified with 2 criminals, one on his left and one on his right. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they began to throw lots, cast dice, to see which one would get his clothes. Some of the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "Well, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is Messiah." Even one of the soldiers mocked him, coming up offering him a sour wine. About 9 in the morning, they crucified him. And on the top of that cross, there was a sign, "The King of the Jews." In fact, there's one that said, the Jewish leader said, "Don't put that up there. You'd have to put, he said he was." And Pilate said, "I put what I want to put." Others cried out, "He saved others. Why not save yourself?" And then in Luke, or in John, I think is where this picks up, the ones on the cross with him even began to mock and deride Jesus. One was saying, "Hey, you saved others. Why don't you save yourself and us and get us off this cross?" But the other thief said, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? We have been put here justly, for we're really getting what we deserve for our deeds. This man has done nothing wrong." Then he says to Jesus, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "I truly tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." We sang about this man as a child and we didn't even realize it. Remember when we would get together and in those kind of campfire songs, they do, "Lord, oh do remember me." Well, slow that song down, and suddenly the entire meaning of the song changes. Do, Lord, oh do, Lord, do remember me It's the prayer of a thief on the cross. And Jesus gives him a home way beyond the blue. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until about 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. Then a miraculous event happens. It says, suddenly, the curtain of the temple, the curtain that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies, was just torn from top to bottom. Now, when the centurion facing him saw that he breathed his last, he said, truly this man was God's Son. There were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and the younger, Mary the mother of James the younger, and Jose and Salome. That's actually Mary, Jesus' mother. These used to follow him and provide for him everything he needed while he was in Galilee. And there were many other women there. When evening came, since it was the day of preparation, that is Friday, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who also was waiting himself expectantly for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus in order that he could give him a proper burial. Pilate was surprised that Jesus was already dead. But then he granted the body to Joseph. And Joseph brought a linen cloth, taking him down, he wrapped him in that linen cloth and laid him in a tomb. Then they rolled a stone against the door. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jose, saw where his body was laid. Matthew included an additional story about that they came to the chief priests and Pharisees came to the Pilate saying that they have this thing. They said that after 3 days I will rise, post a guard in front of that so somebody does not come and steal his body, saying, oh, he's been raised up from the dead. And then the last deception would be worse than the first. And Pilate said to them, you have guards of soldiers. Go make it secure as you can. And so they went and secured the tomb. Notice again, these are the temple guards who now sit outside the tomb of Jesus. So Jesus is in the tomb, not completely ready for burial because he's not been prepared with spices and things for his last place of resting. But as we hear that stone rolled over, suddenly we realize Jesus is dead. And now we wait.